dear students, and welcome to the presentation for Reading Support and Literature, Year 4, Semester 2. As you can see, my name is Melinda Coffey, and I'm the tutor for the subject. And on the first slide, you will see that I can be contacted during the week between 6 and 8 in the evenings, or any time during a Saturday. Just some general notes for all your students is to remember that in order for you to really make a success of the subject and fully understand the subject, it's very important to go through your entire study guide, to look at your learning outcomes as well as to do the learning activities, because that will really provide you with a good description of what is required from you. I would like you to also put effort into doing your assignment, as that is where you get your marks to go on to the examination, and that will already prepare you with the information that you need for the exams as well. Now, when doing your examination or whether you're doing an assignment, it's important to put the information in your own words so that we can see that you really understand what the work is about. When you're doing your assignment, you can also go on the internet or make use of other books apart from your study guide, just so that you can fill it with some of your own examples and your own point of view as well. Okay, so when you are writing exams and doing assignments, please look out for the specific verb that is used within the question, as that tells you exactly how much information is needed from you, along with then the mark allocation for that question. For example, if it says that you must discuss something, then it's good to use the information from the study guide, but also then to make your own conclusions or give through your own point of view. Because the discuss question is a lot about how you interpret the facts that you are reading, and that is what we'd like to know. Okay, so let's go on. We will start with the basic. This is the subject is a lot about reading support and literature, and so it's obviously we need to find out what is reading. And reading is the motivated and fluent coordination of word recognition and comprehension. So it's about in being able to really recognize what you are reading, understanding it, and then to put it all together in a fluent manner after practicing a lot. So it's usually in the hands of the teacher to help learners to develop this, the comprehension, the recognition, and then the retention as well, and put it together in a fluent manner. So, as we said, because reading is the combination of these three components, the recognition, comprehension, and fluency, we now need to look at how can students get to develop those specific skills. So to develop word recognition, they basically need 5 specific things. They need the phonemic awareness, so breaking the words into letters and seeing how that fits. They also need the alphabetic principle, knowing what specific letters sound like. They need to be able to decode. They also need to do word study. And then at the end, they need sight vocabulary. So being able to know a lot of vocabulary words by how it looks. Then, in order to develop comprehension, learners need background knowledge, which is about a lot of topics. Because whatever you give them to read, it won't be just about one topic, but about any topic, basically. Then they need extensive oral and print vocabulary. So they need to be able to not just know a lot of words to say them, but also what they look like when they are written down. Then they also need an understanding about how the English language works. They need to understand how print works. And they need to have knowledge of various kinds of texts. They also need various purposes of reading. So basically, why are you reading? Are you reading just for pleasure, or are you reading to find specific information from the work? And then they also need strategies for constructing meaning from the text, and also for problem solving when meaning breaks down. So basically to be able to use what they are learning about or reading about. Next is they need to develop fluency. And in order to do that, they need to develop a high level of accuracy in their word recognition area. So to recognize the specific words and the letters in the words. Then they have to maintain a rate of reading briskly enough to facilitate comprehension. Because if they are reading in bits and pieces, it's easy to lose out on the understanding of the meaning as a whole. Then they need to use phrasing and expression so that oral reading sounds like speech. So basically practicing how to pronounce words, how to say it, and how it is said within a specific sentence, so that it sounds like they are just talking in a normal way and not in bits and pieces the whole time. Then they need to transform deliberate strategies for word recognition and comprehension into automatic skills. So when they have learned the word recognition and the comprehension skills, they need to be able to put it into practice so that when they read, it all comes through as just a fluent reading. Okay, so in various stages throughout your study guide, there is connections made between the 5 stages of reading, but also the 5 developmental stages of learning to read. So the first one, the 5 stages of reading, is the stages that they go through in order to read, so when they are reading. But the next one, the developmental stages, is how children get to the point of reading. So which stages do they go through? And you will see that in this table is a comparison between the 2 different types, just so that you are clear about that. Okay, so firstly we're going to look at the 5 stages of reading, which is essential for children so that they understand the English, whether it's written or whether it's spoken actually. And each stage has to be mastered before the child can go on into the next stage. You will first start with your word attack skills. So word attack skills is then when you read the words and you see basically what is going on within the word, the letters and all of that. Then the second stage is comprehension. So understanding what it is that has been read. Then they move on to evaluation, which is seeing how what they are reading fits into their own world and the world around them. Then they will move on to application and retention. Application is then being able to use the information that they have read, and then retention is remembering what they have read so that it can be used later on as well. And then in the last stage, when all these other stages have been mastered, they will basically be fluent readers. Alright. Next we have motivation, which is essential for the reading process. If a child is not motivated to read, then they will not really see the benefit. Very few children will actually just pick up a book again and again and become in a habit of just being a reader for the fun of it. Most children see it as something I have to do for school. So they really need motivation from either parents or the teachers. And a lot comes from the teachers at school. So in order to get to the motivation, there's quite a few ideas that teachers can play around with. So in your study guide, there's a whole bunch of them. Here is a few. We start with explanation reading time. So showing the children that you as a teacher like to read. It gives them sort of a meaning and a motivation to do it themselves. Then sharing, where you let children share what they have read with others so that they can interest each other. You also have reading to the learners. So when a teacher reads aloud, this is where learners are motivated by the expression that the teacher uses, the tone of voice. So seeing how the teacher lives themselves into the story makes them also want to go into that world. Then another thing is poetry. Children need different forms of text, not just a story as in a fantasy. Sometimes a bit of poetry can also help them to see a different side of reading. Then book discussion groups, for instance, where children can discuss books that they have read. You as a teacher can discuss what you have read. And then class-created books, for instance, is when children put together their own stories. Things that happen in class or at home, they put their own little book together, and it just motivates them to come up with stories, put it down, and then others can read it, and it's relative to their own lives. All right. Now, as with a lot of things, like when an infant grows up into a toddler and a child, an adolescent, there's always developmental stages that takes place. And the same can be said about reading. Learning to read is actually quite a complex developmental process. Like a baby will learn to walk or to talk in different stages. They will first, for instance, walking, they will first crawl, and then they'll sit up, and then they will take that step to get up and start walking. The same with talking. It's first babbles and coos before the actual speaking starts. Reading is the same. Children might go to school at the same age, but it doesn't mean that they are all at the same level of being able to read yet. So we have the different stages are then awareness and exploration. So this is where children are basically just first seeing what a book looks like, and they see other people reading. Then they move on to emergent reading stage. This is where they go to kindergarten, and here they will work a lot with picture books, and then they learn that there's a story connected to the picture. Then you will go on to early reading stage, sort of kindergarten, early grade 1, where they are then introduced to letters, and then also to how the text and the picture go together. So they will slowly start reading very little. Then they have their transitional reading stage, grade 1, grade 2, where they really see that letters are found in words, words are found in sentences, and then sentences make up this story. It can be put together and a whole story can be created. And then lastly, they will enter the fluent reading stage, where they are able to put everything together, and there it's really about practice to become a fluent reader. So basically for the rest of their school years, they will then practice with first shorter pieces, then longer pieces, until they are basically able to read in a nice fluent manner. Okay, and to understand this reading development process, people have come up with different theories. You have your traditional cognitive, hybrid, and metacognitive theories, and each of them basically explains from their point of view how children then learn to read. For instance, your traditional theory, it's very much about children will first tackle the small things like your letters, so your phonemes and your phonemic awareness and alphabetic principles. They will first go through all of that. So it is very much what they would then call a bottom up. They will start at the bottom and then work their way up to bigger words and sentences and paragraphs, and then that's how the reading progresses. So the cognitive, on the other hand, is more about that individual will see a piece of information, a piece of writing, so literature, and then they will understand it or read it as a whole, and then they'll break it down. So this is basically a top-down approach, and it is basically the complete opposite of your traditional theory. So they will start with the big part, moving to the smaller parts, and seeing then how the smaller parts fit in. This means that they don't necessarily understand the big sentence that they are reading. They just see it as a whole. It's a sentence as a whole, but not necessarily understanding the individual words that's in it. Your hybrid theory, on the other hand, is almost a combination between your traditional and your cognitive theory, because it looks at both approaches. Sometimes certain pieces will be first broken into smaller parts to understand. Other times the individual will read it as a whole and then break it down from there. Your metacognitive theory is more about how a person thinks and feels about what they are reading. So it looks at things like what do you do before, during, and after reading? How do you handle that specific piece? Do they make notes on the side? First interpret exactly what they are doing, what this is about, highlighting some of the passages. So it's really more about their understanding of the piece than about breaking it down necessarily into smaller parts. Okay, so in order to learn to read, there's a couple of skills that will influence this process. And this is your phonemic awareness, so ability to hear and manipulate then the individual sounds that make up the words. Alphabetic principle, your specific letters, recognizing them within words. Fluency, vocabulary, so how big or how small it is, and then your comprehension. So being able to understand what is being read, but also how to get meaning from it. Okay, all over the world, there are reading problems, and these reading problems are caused by 4 specific things. The first is dyslexia, which is a condition in which the brain really struggles to recognize letters and knowing the sound that goes with that specific letter. Often children say things like, I'm looking at the word, but the letters keep moving around within the word. So they can't figure out which letter goes where and how it must sound in that specific word. Then we have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. And this is where children have a real difficulty to calm down and be focused on one activity for a period of time. Now, the younger a child is, the less ability they have to focus for a long period of time. So this is not a condition that can just be thrown out there if a child does not sit still or doesn't listen, but really to look over a long period of time, what is the impact and how they are dealing with it. Then we have our auditory processing disorder. So this is where the child hears something, but they cannot make sense of exactly what they are hearing, which makes it very difficult to follow instructions especially. And then you have your visual processing issues, whereby there's a bit of a disconnect between what the eye sees and how the brain then interprets it. So they might struggle to see differences between letters like a B and a D or a P. It might all just at first seem the same. So it's also important, if we want children to really be motivated to read, a reading culture has to be created within a school. And there's many ways that this reading culture can be created. You can use various areas of the school and various people within the school. Now, the first one is, for instance, if we say use the school entrance foyer. Here you can put up pictures of children reading, can put up posters about new books that's available. If you use your school corridors or notice boards, you can, for instance, put up signs that point towards where is the library. If you use, for instance, learners in the classroom, it's important that learners get enough time to read, but also that they get to share stories with each other, or, for instance, to have a reading buddy. And then, for instance, your school library can also be used, in the sense that it has to be well sourced and well staffed. So enough books need to be there and enough people to help children on how to use the books and where to find the books. And also it's nice to put up a display about a new book that's available. Now you can read further in your study guide about how each of these areas can be used. So it's important that a teacher supports a learner during each of their reading stages. Typically, we start here at stage 2, if you notice, because stage 1 is more at home. The child doesn't really have interaction much with the teacher yet. They aren't in school, so that's something that happens at home. But in stage 2, where they become emergent readers, a teacher can do things, for instance, like take these kids on a book walk or make connection to familiar words. When it comes to your early readers, you will, for instance, model finger point reading. So trace in a book as you read along with the finger. Lots of patience necessary at this stage, and then also you have to provide explicit and systematic instruction in vocabulary. So exactly what you want, the stages of getting there, how can they remember it. Your transitional readers, there you can develop mini lessons. So here you can already put together a reading lesson, just a short version, so that you can put in activities along, homeworks that they can do, discussions that can be had, questions to ask and answer. And you can also focus a lot on making predictions using serious books. So books that there's maybe book 1, book 2, book 3, and there's basically a storyline in each that's the same, and then they can predict what do they think will happen now in the next book after reading the first one. Then lastly, with your fluent readers, it's all about practice. Just providing enough time for them to practice their reading, maybe using the same passage so that they really can hear how it is when it's fluent and it is read in a smooth way. Then literature satisfies a number of aims and psychological needs for learners. That is why it's important that literature is present in each classroom. For instance, when we look at a cultural value provided by literature, literature helps to tell the story about a specific culture, what they do, how the people interact. So a learner can really learn about that culture, whether it's their own or a different one. And that is where the next one comes in, which is expanding horizons. It's important that learners learn not just about their own culture, but other histories and cultures and what happens out there in the world, so that they can also be able to talk amongst themselves and know what is going on. Then we have building vocabulary. In order to build a good vocabulary, it's important to read, because when we speak, we tend to use the same words over and over when we are telling stories. But when you read, there's such a big, large amount of different new words to be learned. Then it also improves writing skills. If you want to write better, just read a lot, because this is where learners can see how language is used within a piece, how it works, where else you can use specific new words that they've learned. Then also it teaches critical thinking. So reading gives, or literature gives the learner the opportunity to take a piece and to analyze it and see what they can get from it. Think about it, make their own opinions, their own point of view, and how they can use this thing in their own lives. So just make that real critical thinking stronger. There are specific types of reading, and each of these reading have a purpose in the lives of learners. First of all, you have skimming. Skimming is basically when you have, say for instance, 5 different articles in front of you, and you just want to know what each of them is about. So the learners are not zooming in and reading through it. They just see, okay, this one is about dogs, that one's about flowers, this one is about people, and then they just know briefly what it is about. Then when you move on to scanning, it means that you get your eyes to move across a page or a paragraph, and you are looking for a specific point of information. So scanning until that specific information is found. Then you have your intensive reading, which is reading an entire piece with the outcome of getting specific information on that piece. Then with your extensive reading, this is all about reading for pleasure. So it's not about schoolwork or reading something that was given to you. It's just taking a book and just reading it because it's enjoyable. When you are in a classroom situation, you have silent reading and you have loud reading, and each of them have their place and their advantages. With silent reading, it is less about what it sounds like and more about giving focus to the piece that's being read and understanding it in depth, and then what you can make of it. Whereas loud reading, it's good to have a skill to build fluency, but also a bit of confidence within a child. So silent reading helps children to better understand what they are reading and then be able to really focus in on it. They can think about it, ask themselves questions, reflect on it, and they can really get absorbed in the story. The advantages then that loud reading has is that it helps to cultivate internal listening skills. It also helps to sharpen the ear so that you can really hear what specific things sound like, start to follow the story or the narrative. Then reading aloud helps with diction and expression to see how specific things must be expressed within a story. For instance, exclamation point, or what does it sound like when a character in a story asks a question. Then it also actually helps to improve spelling because the learner can then hear what the word sounds like. They can hear specific letters, and then that helps to build this vocabulary and spelling. Then reading also is a good exercise to improve their own writing and speaking abilities. It gives that confidence to just go out there and be able to speak. Now, with all literature that is used, there's various different genres that can be used within the classroom. Now, there's a whole long list. We can look at a few, like for instance, a picture book is all about the pictures. There might be text, but rarely. So it's about understanding just the picture. Then your picture storybook, on the other hand, is a story, so there's text, but pictures that support this specific text or story. Your traditional literature that's the stories passed on from one generation to the next. Folk tales, for instance, is about giving through specific meaning about something that happens in real life. If you take, for instance, modern fantasy, it's the fantasy part indicates that it's not story with truth, but the modern says that it's a story about the now experience. So it's not historical, it's not about back then, but about issues that children might deal with now, although it's still a fantasy, so it might not be the exact truth. Your non-fiction or information books provides information about a specific subject or specific topic. So if you hear what each of these entail, you can see that it's important that children are not just told about one specific genre, but introduced to a lot of different genres so that they have something to fill them, and that because amongst some of this, they will find their specific interest. Some children are not really interested in fantasy, for instance. They want to know the real facts about things. So introducing them to a wide variety of genres helps them to also be motivated at the end of the day. So you can read further in your study guide about these different genres. So with literature, it provides or plays a vital role in then developing learners' values, their morals, their gender roles, their sexual identities. For instance, when it comes to moral values, children learn about the values of life and how to deal with issues by reading about characters that go through the same issues that they go through, and how those characters then deal with those specific issues. It gives them an understanding of what to do, what not to do, good things, bad things. And then when it comes to gender roles and sexual identity, as children read through the literature, they will notice that there's specific things that are said about boys or men and about girls or women, and then in this way they will relate to one of those genders as well. They will feel closer to the one or to the other. They will see that, for instance, when it comes to stereotypes, there's some things that's written that only boys can do, and there's some things that only girls can do. So as a teacher, it's always good to get them also to think about gender equity. So to not be too focused on what boys should do or what girls should do, but to give them a good overall sense just of gender. So teachers can use the following strategies. They can analyze gender assumptions. So the things that are specifically said about each gender, and whether the learners think that that is the right thing to say about it or not. They can ask questions about the main characters. So how do the learners see the main characters being portrayed? Then they can ask learners to reverse the genders of individuals. Like you see, for examples, what if Sleeping Beauty was a boy and not a girl? How would that have been? Then you can have learners guess the gender of the writer based on the story. So for instance, does the writer promote boys and their stereotypes more, or girls and their stereotypes more? Then you can ask learners to use gender neutral names when they write their own stories. For instance, just using the name Sam. So they don't say it's Sam the boy or Sam the girl, it's just Sam. And then based on how the story is written and what the character does, the rest of the learners can then guess what is the gender. Then you can also help learners to adopt the opposite sex's point of view about specific topics or specific issues that they go through. So basically put themselves in the shoes of either a boy or a girl and how it would be if they were there. Then literature can also promote learners' understanding of themselves as well as others and in the world around them, in the sense that it builds a positive sense of the self. It gives the ability to practice self-control. It gives effective decision-making skills. So for instance, how do I deal with decisions about a specific issue that I'm going through? It gives them a moral system of belief. So what is right, what is wrong? And it also helps with pro-social connectedness, helping them connect to other people. And all of this can be achieved through basically stories that the children are reading. Like for instance, the topic of empathy. Empathy is also promoted through children's literature, in the sense that as children read about the issues that the characters in the book go through, they learn to also empathize, to put themselves in the shoes of this character, and then to find out, how did the character feel? How did they deal with a specific situation? And that then in turn helps them to connect with people in real life in the same way. I see you're going through this situation, this must be what you're feeling, so let me help you, let me be there for you. Okay, so for all of the things that we spoke about, the empathy, the connectedness to others, and gender roles, and also moral values, it's important for you to just read further in your study guide to really get a good understanding, and also to make up your mind as to whether you agree or disagree, whether literature actually has an impact on the development of children in these areas. So when it comes to selecting books for children, it's important to keep certain criteria in mind. Firstly, it needs to be or have compelling content. So it needs to either be an action or a suspense. Is it a discussion or dialogue between characters? Is it there may be humor in the story? Then it's important to have realistic characters. Children need to, when they are reading through a piece, they need to connect with the character. They need to feel what the character feels. Then it's good to have pictures in a book that gives a strong, clear picture of what's going on. So the illustrations need to really speak to the learners. And then when it comes to finding a book, it's not always easy. Sometimes books are easily obtained, and other times you'll have to really search a bit to get to the specific material that you are looking for and that your learners will connect with. Okay, with all children, they have different areas in their lives that's important to them. And 3 of these areas is sports, watching television, and then of course their academics, their reading, things in that area. And it's important as a teacher to help learners strike a balance between these 3 aspects. It's important that they get time for their sports, but that they get time also to watch television, because there's also a learning component to the television, especially when they watch documentaries, for instance. And then also reading and doing their homework and paying attention to their academics. There has to be a balance between these three, as they are also essential for children. So specific things that a teacher can maybe suggest to an athlete, or all children for that matter, to deal with this balance is things like to get organized and stay organized. So get all your things together, get yourself a calendar, and whether it's monthly or weekly, get everything that you'll need so that you don't have to run around and not know what's going on. Then also manage your time. So use every possible minute that's there. If there's sport in the afternoon, but there's a little bit of time before that, know how that time is going to be used. Plan your week, so write down all the activities, the tests, the assignments, everything that is happening within that week, so that the learner knows exactly what is going to happen, when it's going to happen. Then use weekends wisely. It's true that all learners want to take a bit of rest over a weekend, and also a lot of times sport is played on a weekend. That's when the matches take place. But that doesn't take place the entire weekend. Learners have to learn that putting in a bit of work over a weekend is just as important as putting in that time during the week. Then there's also using travel time wisely. And for a lot of kids, it's quite a commute to school. School isn't just around the block, so that's time that can be used, for instance, to read up about the day's work, so that you get ahead of the game. Then do not procrastinate or postpone things. If a learner knows about an assignment for a whole week, do a little bit every day instead of the day before trying to finish everything that there is to do. And lastly, do not get behind. Always stay ahead, do homework when it has to happen, give in assignments exactly on the due date, and then also read a little bit ahead in your subject so they always know what is going on. These are the things that really help a child to have balance and to make a success out of their academics. So learners need to be prepared for the reading process through the use of reading readiness activities. Now, each of these activities, we'll see in your study guide, there's a whole list of different activities for each activity, and it's important that you also read through some of those examples. So we have our visual perception activities. It helps a child to make sense of the information that the eye sends to the brain, how the vision and the perception of what's being seen is connected. Then you have visual discrimination activities. Helps a child to see the difference between objects or pictures, and to see whether there's certain things that match with each other and what the differences are between the different objects or pictures. Then there's form constancy. So being able to see a specific form, for instance a square, even if it is rotated into the shape of a diamond, to be able to see that that is still the square, it's just rotated. Then we have our visual memory, so remembering what you saw, storing that information in short-term memory. And your sequential memory is being able to remember a series of forms and then to find them again. For instance, if you have 2 red dots, a blue dot and a green dot, where else do you see that specific pattern? Then we have visual spatial relations. This is being able to determine one form or part of a form that is now turned in a different direction than the others. Your figure ground refers to the ability to locate or identify a shape or a specific object that is within a busy visual environment. So for instance, if you have a scene of a kitchen in a storybook, to ask the kids, where's the teacup in the kitchen? So they should be able to then find that specific teacup. Okay, so as we are a society in which technology is basically taking over and being used more and more, the same applies within school in the form of multimodal text. So multimodal is just different forms of text. And it means that it's a variety of different text that's used together, so it basically complements each other, and you are using it at the same time, so in a synchronized way, and it all provides a meaning at the end of the day. It can be spoken, it can be written language, moving or still images, and it's usually presented either on paper or on an electronic screen. So for instance, if you are doing your lesson topic is about wild animals, then you will have a piece of information, written information perhaps, about wild animals. You'll have a picture of wild animals, and you can even incorporate then maybe a short video clip also about how wild animals interact. So that is, it's the same topic, it's connected, but you're using different ways or different forms of the text. And this really helps learners because learners take in information in different ways. So it has a good advantage for being used in the classroom setting. And also because learners are being exposed to technology more and more, and they need to be able to understand how to use it for their benefit of education as well. It's important to incorporate multimodal text and not just stick to one form. That might be a bit boring to specific children in your class, and they might lose focus. And then on the other hand, you also have learners that don't come from an environment where there's maybe computers or the internet or television even. And this, if you use multimodal text in your classroom, it gives them the advantage of knowing then how they can use it, even though they do not maybe have it at home. When you are reading to especially senior primary learners, there's specific skills that you can apply. You can plan enough time, so you don't want to make it, you want to give them enough time but not too long so that you completely lose their attention. You definitely have to preview the book yourself to make sure that it is appropriate for your learners. You can, for instance, read with expression. So based on what the character is going through, show that specific expression so that learners also learn what it sounds like or what it looks like. You can encourage predictions from them about what will happen next. You can watch their expression and their body language, because this is how you'll know whether they find the story interesting or whether they are perhaps confused by what is going on, which gives the opportunity to then ask questions. And lastly, you can point out the parts of the story that you liked, and also give them then the opportunity to point out the parts that they themselves like. So there's quite a few reading skills that you should apply as a teacher when you are reading. And reading is also definitely not just about grabbing a book and starting to read to the class. A bit of planning is necessary. So it's important that teachers create their reading lesson plan. And some of the things that you need to keep in mind is then to come up with some fun activities or even games that they can play, because sometimes the lesson that you are doing might not be about a specifically interesting topic, but then you can use those activities and games to get the kids motivated and interested so that they want to learn about it and take part in it. And other things to look for in a good reading lesson plan is then that it obviously introduces children to pleasure of reading, motivates them to read, and you will have activities and discussions so that they can interact and feel a part of it, and also to give them books that they find interesting to read. So centering the lesson around something that is interesting and relevant to their own lives. Okay, so reading comprehension is important because reading is all about understanding what you are reading. So your reading comprehension will basically have two parts. First, your comprehension, which is understanding what you are reading, and secondly, your retention, being able to then remember what it is that you have read. So comprehension is, like I said, the understanding of what is being read, and they can do this in being able to decode what is being read, and then to make connections between what they read and what they already know. So seeing how those two link together, and think deeply about what they have read. And then you need to focus on the retention of, if they understand it, it doesn't help if they don't keep it, they don't put it in their short-term memory. So you can help them to develop their retention through explicit and varied teaching. So first of all, you need to be explicit in your instructions, but you also need to have different ways of getting them to basically remember things, because not all children have the same way of taking and remembering information. So you as a teacher have to come with your toolbox almost of different strategies that you can use. That's the reading retention strategies then specifically. Then also encourage questioning. It's important that learners question to themselves what they are reading, but also get into the habit of asking questions, and in that way memorizing what they are reading. Then vocabulary instruction. It's important for them to learn new words, so building their vocabulary. Monitoring, learners need to monitor themselves and check up on where they are, what they understand. They need to do summarizing. Summarizing helps to really lay down the information and also to put it in your own words so that you understand it. Focus and attention. It's important that children have focus and attention while reading something, because if they are distracted and their focus is all over the place, they are not paying attention to what is being read, and that information will then not go into their memory. And lastly, motivating. You need to motivate the learners so that they can keep practicing their reading retention skills once they have those. So we said earlier that in a classroom situation you have both silent reading and loud reading, and if you're going to practice your silent reading in class, there is a way that learners need to be prepared for the silent reading, and this is by pacing the reading, so making it not a long drawn out period of time, but giving them time to read a bit and then interact and then read a bit again. You have to make it engaging. Learners need to be able to share with each other what they have read, what they found interesting, because learners learn a lot through their own social interaction as well. Then you must make it relevant, so it has to fit in with a child's current life. It has to relate to their experiences and what they are going through. And lastly, it's also managing the reading. So as children are reading silently, you need to walk through, check up on them, make sure that they are still on track. Because otherwise you'll get children who are staring out the window or drawing pictures. So keep an eye on them while they are doing their silent reading. Just as with silent reading, loud reading, we can also have small group readings. And this has its place, and it is important in a classroom situation, because with small group reading, there's a meaningful literacy experience. Learners can, their needs can be addressed individually. As a teacher, you can keep track of what their needs are and then how you can take care of them. It also gives children or learners the opportunity to express their point of view. With a small group, everyone can be engaged, so everyone has a voice. And then also children learn best from social interaction. So with the smaller the group, the more they can interact with each other and they can discuss the reading. With everything in life, there is some form of an assessment that comes at the end. And with reading assessment, there's a specific purpose, specific things we want to know. Firstly, we want to know the strengths and the weaknesses of learners when it comes to their reading. Then we want to assess meta-linguistic awareness. So how do they understand their reading? How do they interact with their reading? Then it's important also because it helps a teacher to plan a personalized reading plan for each and every learner. After you then know what their strengths and their weaknesses are, you'll know what to work on. And then it also examines the reader's ability to read both text and single words. Because it's not just important for a child to be able to read a word within a sentence, but also to be able to read that word on its own out of a sentence. Usually, one of the assessments that's used is the early grade reading assessment, or the EGRA, and this is a one-on-one 15-minute oral diagnostic assessment designed to assess competencies in 5 specific areas, and these are the child's phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Now there are both in your EGRA, there's formative continuous and summative assessment. So your formative continuous it's a formal assessment that takes place throughout the year. So it is more different, smaller assessments that take place, and it helps to shape and direct the teaching learning process. Helps teachers to adjust lesson plans midway if they see that things are not going good. And then you get your summative assessment, which takes place at the end of the year, based on then how things went throughout the year. So the achievements and the progress of the learner throughout the year. So there are specific common reading difficulties in senior primary phase. The one that we spoke about earlier was causes of reading difficulties, that where it says the dyslexia and the ADHD, but now these are the actual common reading difficulties that children might experience. For one, slow reader. If a learner is a slow reader, it makes it difficult for them to keep up with tests and assessments because they rarely can finish their tests and assessments. And if you are a slow learner, it's easier to lose focus and motivation than to continue. There's also that children cannot read for long periods. So they do not have that focus and that attention to keep on reading for a long period of time, which also makes it difficult to get through. For instance, if you have a reading comprehension, which is a longer piece, it's difficult for them to keep that focus and get through the entire thing. Then, if the comprehension skills are not keeping up, it also leads to not success within your reading, because there's specific comprehension skills that need to be put together. Child needs to understand. They need to be able to analyze what they are reading, and then they need to put it in place. And if this does not keep up, it becomes very difficult for a child to then be a fluent reader. And then some children just don't enjoy reading. And as with all things in life, that which you do not enjoy, you won't continue practicing, and you just don't want to do it. So learners in the senior primary phase will struggle with reading difficulties a lot because there's a lack of certain skills. And these skills are your decoding, comprehension, and retention. So decoding is when there's difficulty to hear the sound of different letters in a word. So to really break that down. And there are specific signs that you will know that there's a problem with decoding. Some of them is issues in sounding out words, lack of expression in reading, slow reading pace. So there's a few that a teacher can look out for. Then when it comes to your comprehension, or really understanding and interpreting what you have just read, there's also specific signs that can be looked out for that shows that there's a problem in comprehension. And one of it is confusion in meaning of individual words, and also how those words can then be used in a sentence. But there's also have a tendency to miss out or skip significant details, and there's a lack of concentration while reading because they are not really understanding what they are reading, so they really aren't concentrating much. And then the last one is your retention. So the ability to decode and comprehend is important here because you first need to be able to see and understand the letters in a word and then understand the whole paragraph as a whole in order to remember what you have read. If you don't have those two basics, then it becomes difficult. So there's also some signs that there's problem in retention, and this is, for instance, difficulty relating to what is being read, to previous knowledge that they have. There's also trouble in real-life application. So how do I use really what I'm reading now in my own life? And it's also difficult to memorize or recap information that was read. Because if you don't understand it, it's not put into your memory so that you can actually say, but this is what happened and this is what I read. So standardized test is, there's quite a lot of argument about standardized test and whether it's good or useful. But a standardized test is any form of test that requires the person taking the test to answer the same question or a selection of questions, but in the same way, so that you can then see in relation to others how is the child doing. And it is also scored in a standardized or consistent manner. The most common forms of standardized tests that we have is your achievement test, which is usually done in school, your international comparison test, so tests that can be used all over the world, and then your psychological tests. Now one might ask, how useful are these standardized tests then if there's so much disagreement? People find it problematic to use because of the reason that test findings are often incorrect, and there's a question as to what is being measured. And as you read further, there's also the fact that not all tests are really applicable for all culture or all age groups. So you'll find children within the same age, but it's not really culturally focused, so it makes it difficult for children. For instance, when we take tests that are, it's an American-based test, but we want children in Africa to answer it. They don't have the same level of understanding, so it's difficult to measure then how well our children do. And then, for instance, usually a test like this lacks the fact that it doesn't say much about the child or the learner, which is something that, for instance, a teacher can pick up throughout the whole year and have a better understanding of what this child is, what they like, how they see things. So is it then worth testing at all or not? There's a lot of debates, and basically in the end of the day, standardized tests are fine to use for making or for diagnosing learning needs and then to provide a better service to learners. But it's not really as effective to assess a specific learner's reading abilities. There are various different support that can be offered by a teacher to learners that face reading difficulties. There's making your instructions more explicit or more clear, exactly what you want. There's providing systematic instruction, so dividing it up into smaller parts. There's increasing opportunities for practice. As they say, practice makes perfect. There's applying skills and strategies in meaningful text, so all those different retention skills, comprehension skills, to use those. And apart from this, which is the overall support for learners with difficulties, there's also very specific support that can be offered for learners who struggle with stammering, rhythm, intonation, and vocabulary. And it's important that you look in your study guide and that you really read through how a teacher can then support a child that deals with these issues. Feedback is something that we receive in all forms of life, and there's a specific way that feedback should be given. For instance, the feedback and the comments should be educative. It should be given in a timely manner. You should be sensitive to the needs of the learner. You can ask the 4 questions. Feedback can be given either verbally, telling the child, or even in a written form. And you can educate learners then to give feedback to each other. So a bit of peer feedback. And then it's important to give genuine praise. And then also to invite your learners to give feedback to you as a teacher. So as with where we can use multimodal text, we can also use the digital video camera and audio recorders within our classrooms. Digital video cameras help children to just incorporate technology in a fun and an educative way. For instance, learners can interview each other about a topic throughout the school year. They can create a weekly or monthly newscast. So what's going on in our school, what's going on in our class, or even create an end-of-year school video or a slideshow. And in the same way, we can use our audio sound recorders in 4 ways. It can help with brainstorming. Kids can make recordings and share it with each other. It can help to refine your voice. You can record, listen to it, and see where to make adjustments, maybe for an oral, for example. It's good for practice and revision, and it's good for a self-assessment. So record questions and then answer the questions for yourself to see where you are. So that brings us to the conclusion of our presentation, and I wish you all the best with your assignment and your examinations. Thank you.